Today's scripture reading is from the book of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. Jesus crossed the lake again, and on the other side, a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came forward. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded with him, "My daughter is about to die. Please come and place your hands on her so that she can be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A swarm of people were following Jesus, crowding in on him. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she got worse. Because she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, if she can touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Her bleeding stopped immediately, and she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. At that very moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd, said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Don't you see the crowd pressing against you? Yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus looked around carefully to see who had done it. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward. Knowing what had happened to her, she fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. He responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease." While Jesus was still speaking with her, messengers came from the synagogue leader's house, saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher any longer?" But Jesus overheard their report and said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, just keep trusting." He didn't allow anyone to follow him except Peter, James, and John, James' brother. They came to the synagogue leader's house, and he saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "What's all of this commotion and crying about? The child isn't dead, she's only sleeping." They laughed at him, but he threw them all out, and then took the child's parents and his disciples with him. He went to the room where the child was. Taking her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Young woman, get up." Suddenly the young woman got up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. They were shocked. He gave them strict orders that no one should know what happened. Then he told them to give her something to eat. So in today's reading.
And our sermon hymn is "He Touched Me."
Yeah. The story that the Gospel of Mark tells us, which Rick read just a little bit earlier, this story takes place on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, which isn't a sea at all, but is a large freshwater lake. And in case you need a little trivia to go home with, it is 13 miles long and 8 miles across, surrounded by mountains. Now, Jesus had taken a boat from the eastern side of the lake where the population was more Gentile or non-Jews. And now he had crossed over from that part, the eastern side, to the western side of the lake, where the majority of people who lived on the western side were Jews, and where 90% of those people were living in poverty. The Gospel of Mark doesn't say that there was any particular reason that this huge crowd was there when Jesus got off the boat. But I'm thinking that, well, they probably had heard about this Jesus person. They probably heard his stories of healing, his miracles, the things he had done and said. And, there were some incredible stories told about him. If they hadn't seen it for themselves, they probably heard about how he had cast demons out of a man into a herd of pigs, which had then jumped off a cliff into the sea. So I imagine that there were a lot of people there for different reasons. Reasons to check out this man, this Jesus person they heard about, maybe to check out what wild thing might he say or preach today, or I am in need and I wonder if he can help me. Will he offer a word that I need today for myself? I wonder what it would have been like to have been a person in the crowd and to be near enough to touch him if you dared. Like the woman who had had 12 years of continual hemorrhaging, and I'm sure was weak and anemic and had no energy. Those are not very good things to experience. I mean, that's kind of my mild way to put that. And because she had this hemorrhage, which in Jewish culture was considered despicable and dirty and disgusting, any woman who had her monthly cycle for 7 days was considered unclean. And no one could be around her, no one could associate with her. Her family could not touch her or be touched by her, or they were considered unclean. And then you had to go through a very strict ritual of cleansing to be able to associate with others, to go to the temple or to the synagogue. So for normal women, once a week they had to go through that stigma of being unclean. This poor woman had 12 long years of being ostracized and shamed and cast away and not touched, not considered in any way, not given respect. And also Rick read to us from the gospel that she had sought help from physicians and they had not helped her. And so I can imagine her being in the crowd and thinking, if this Jesus person is the healer that I have heard about, what could I speak to him? Maybe I'll catch his eye. But if I do, what would I say to him? What words? How could I even address him with a request for healing? And I think it must have entered her mind then that maybe if I just touched the hem of his garment, which means she would have had to get low to the ground, maybe even laid on the ground as he walked by to try to touch his garment. And then when she came in contact with his garment, which she did, according to the story, she felt the energy come back into her body. Oh, what a relief. What a relief that she was healed, that she experienced that. And it's almost, comical in a way to me that Jesus, there's this whole big crowd of people. I'm thinking, like crowds at the state fair or crowds at the Sheboygan County Fair. You know how it is when you're elbow to elbow, you're being jostled around, and all these, people bump into you, and that Jesus actually turned around and wanted to know who touched me. Even the disciples said, "Come on, Jesus, how many people are here? You really want to try to figure out which one of them touched you?" But he did. I think because he wanted people to know about the faith of this woman. And so he pretty much insisted. He stood there waiting for an answer. I imagine the disciples might have been a little bit embarrassed. And this woman had the courage and the strength to come forward and say, "It was me, I touched you." And instead of getting angry or reprimanding her, he said, "Daughter." He called her daughter, one of the most endearing words he could have called her. Not, "How dare you touch me, you despicable, dirty, unclean person." He called her daughter and told her that her faith and her belief in him had made her well. And I'm sure that he was teaching the crowd, this is what you need. Be able to have the courage and the faith to ask for healing. We don't know exactly the details of what happened with her, what happened after she was healed, and we don't know exactly what happened. We aren't told what happened after Jesus went to the home of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and what happened after his daughter was not only healed but brought back to life. But if it were me, either it was my daughter who was brought back to life, or if I were the woman with the hemorrhage, wouldn't really care what happened, how it happened. Mm-hmm. I would just be so grateful that my daughter was brought back to life, or that I, who had been considered unclean and untouchable, was now, I had energy and health, and I was healed. The mother and father had their child back. This woman was alive again. She was well again. And that's really what mattered. I think the moving part of this gospel stories for me is that when this woman reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment, after being so weak and feeling so marginalized, and when that little girl's hand was taken by Jesus and he said to her, "Little girl, get up." The part of it that touches me is that we are that little girl. We are that woman. We have felt the things that they and their families were going through. Sometimes we believe, we have the faith that this woman with the hemorrhage had, and we have the faith that Jairus and his wife had in asking Jesus, come, if you just touch her, she'll be made well. And sometimes we don't have very much faith. Things have been so difficult or so challenging or so hard that we don't believe very much of anything. We would give almost anything to believe if we just could, but we don't feel very strong in our faith. There are those of us who sometimes just feel like giving up, because we're not sure we're getting anywhere. And that's real. That's the reality. We're human. And Jesus says, with me, you aren't just partly alive. In me, you are fully alive. Open your hearts and open your minds and open yourselves to me and to what I have to offer, and see the miracles that are taking place all around you. It is that life-giving power that is at the heart of these two stories that Mark sandwiched together in the gospel today. The story of a little girl, 12 years old, and the story of a woman whose life had been overwhelmingly difficult for 12 years. And the power of new life and new hope and new being. Whether we sometimes believe that strongly or sometimes we struggle with not believing very much. It's that power from Jesus that gives us the power to get up, even when getting up is not easy for us anymore. And the power to keep getting up and getting up and getting up, even when it's the last thing we want to do. What joyful news these two stories give us and remind us that Jesus is always reaching out to us and saying, come, I love you. Let me touch you. Let me be in your life. Look to me, and I will give you what you need. How wonderful to experience that healing touch. Amen.
Amen.